Hello, Leafs fans, and welcome to the Babbling Buds Podcast, hosted by Jordan Jacklin.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Babbling Buds Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Jordan Jacklin, a once-a-week show covering the Toronto Maple Leafs and the NHL as a whole, bringing in a mix of various analytics and the eye test when discussing players in the team. I thank you for joining me today, and to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, follow us on Twitter at the Babbling Buds to stay up to date on all news. So it is a pleasure to announce the first guest of the pod, Alex Hobson, a Toronto Maple Leafs and draft contributor for the Hockey Raiders, also a co-host of the Shanna Clan podcast and the PTS Sports Show. Make sure to follow his Twitter at HobsonA16. I'm assuming you're a huge Mitch Martyr fan, eh?
A big Mitch Martyr fan. He was the first modern jersey that I picked up. So, the 16 actually doesn't have to do with Mitch, though. I was Darcy Tucker was my first ever favorite player, and I was also born on October 16th. So the cards just lined up perfectly for me there.
And that works too, because Mitch Martyr used to wear Darcy Tucker, you said, or Doug Gilmour? Did you say?
Darcy Tucker used to wear 16, yeah.
Yeah, okay, there we go. That makes more sense, but I guess that worked well when Mitch took the number. So let's just start with this.
Very much did.
Let's start with our Leafs news first off, because we're going to get into a very long and fun segment afterwards. We got to talk just briefly, what happened to John Tavares is something that most really won't forget anytime soon. He made incidental contact with Corey Perry after initially being struck by Ben Sherratt. It was a scary situation. It ended up just being a concussion, and further we found out a knee injury, which was the best case scenario based on what was shown, And one thing that was actually brought to us on Leafs Twitter, I encourage you all to donate to the John Tavares Foundation if you're able to, This initiative was started by Michael, also known as at the Leafs IMO on Twitter. And the big takeaway here is to donate whatever you can if you're able. And the proceeds go towards providing essential resources required for giving as many kids the chance to have proper nutrition and embrace healthy lifestyle choices, Hashtag win it for JT. And if you can, donate it to his charity, because that'd be a really awesome thing to do. But let's start off with this, We're going to be doing some player grades throughout the first two games, Alex. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give some stats. I'm going to give some analytics. I'm going to give just general play from the eye test. This is going to be a little bit fun. So let's do this. The hashtag win for JT movement, as I just mentioned, was in full swing last night. And the starts of the team really just showcased how great they can play. So let's just talk about it. We can give our players grades for various members on the team and how they have performed to what they were expected to. And we got to start off with the big three, the stars of the team at the moment, and that's Matthews, Marner, and Nylander throughout the first two games. Austin Matthews was held pointless in game one, but he really raised the bar in game two. His stats so far are as follows. In 2 games, he's got a goal, 2 assists, 3 points, 9 hits. They made sure to mention that on the broadcast. He's really starting to up his physical play. He's averaging 22 to 24 minutes time on ice per night. His expected goals for was 81.7% in game one, 84.3% in game two. Really good stuff so far. I'm curious what you think of the play of Austin Matthews so far, Alex.
I think you pretty much nailed the first point that I was going to make right there when you mentioned the fact that he had 9 hits so far. And that's what's really set Matthews apart from the other players, in my opinion, anyways. I'm not really willing to look too much into his first game, because I think after that Tavares injury happened, I think the Leafs were in probably not the right headspace that they wanted to be in. So I'll give him a pass on the first game, but the entire team stepped it up in game two. And like you said, Matthews looks like a man possessed out there. He's realized that he's 6'3" and 220, and that, that's a pretty intimidating size to have to go up against on the ice. So he's really started to throw the body more. I'm seeing him starting to get a little more involved in scrums, and overall, I think he's sort of developed into, like, we all know him as the sniper, Austin Matthews, but he's sort of developed himself into a sniper power forward, two-way forward combo. He can play, he can help out defensively, he can throw the body, and he can score goals. So, through those 2 games, I think especially last night, he's looked incredible, and he's just been the Austin Matthews that we all know and love.
Well, let's not forget, he hit 2 posts in yesterday's game, one on the power play, I believe, maybe even both. We saw that hilarious screen grab of him, just laughing as he's getting like cross-checked behind, and he even threw the huge hit on Brendan Gallagher yesterday too. So he's looked very great. For a grade from me personally, I'm giving him an A. Like he had an okay game one for his standards, and obviously the emotional factors of that game are quite evident. Like I don't think you can judge a player's, not really that you can really judge them too much on one game anyways. I know everybody did that with Jake Gardner, but you have to give the player the benefit of the doubt, and he played up to what he has done this entire season in game two, and he's honestly been the best skater in my opinion so far for this team. What grade would you give him, Alex? What would be your final grade if you had to put 11?
I would probably give him. Are we doing pluses and minus years as well?
Or you can do plus or minus, of course. The whole thing.
Okay. I would probably say I'll give him an A, just an A. I know that kind of contradicts what my question about the pluses and minuses, but I'll give him an A right on the dot. I think he's been one of their best players for sure throughout this first two games.
Yeah, totally. And it's really hard to argue with that. But now we get to talk a little bit more interesting dialogue here with Mitch Martyr. He nearly scored a beautiful goal in game two. Obviously, it wasn't meant to be. Probably should have shot it backhand there. I'm talking about the one where he ended up bringing it to his forehand. And I think it was Shea Weber's stick that deflected it out of the open net on the power play. But he finally broke through really in game two, with a 2-assist night. And his stats for the series so far are as follows. So he's got 2 assists for 2 points in 2 games. 3 hits, and he notably played 27 minutes and 23 seconds in game one. Just absurd minutes. And then, just a measly 22-15 game two, obviously what a scrub. His expected goals for his numbers are really good as well in the 82.97% game one, 86.27% in game two. So you can tell that Matthews line is really a dominating play at 5v5. What is your grade for him? Because I'm just curious what you would think of Mitch Martyr's play so far in this series.
So I would probably give Mitch Martyr a B+ throughout these first 2 games. I know that obviously in game 2 he was much better than he was in game 1, and like I said, I'm not going to be too hard on the guys for their performance in game 1 because of the aftermath of the whole Tavares injury. But Martyr, even dating back to last year and even a little bit into the Boston series from 2019, he's been kind of quiet in the playoffs, and I found that in game 1 and for a little bit in game 2. He sort of looked like Mitch from 2019-20, where he didn't really have a lot of confidence in himself, and he wasn't taking shots when he was supposed to be, and he was holding on to the puck for too long. Having said that, he stepped up and put up 3 points in game 2. So I would probably give him a B+ just to kind of round it out a little bit. I think he's got potential to move up to an A throughout game 3 and 4.
Oh, you totally took my grade out of the water. I gave him a B+ as well. He created a lot of scoring chances. He just whiffed on a lot of them, especially in game 1. But his poise with the puck was quite evident in game 2. He made a great play to set up Rasmus Sandin on the power play, and you can just tell when that power play's on, they can be one of the best. And, it's starting to look like that through the playoffs. But this is a real interesting thing I want to set up here with Mitch Martyr, he could have scored on the backhand, like I said, in that one goal. And this has brought up the question on Leafs Twitter a tiny bit. I think that stopped after game 2. He played much better. But I want to know what you thought. Has he been good enough in the playoffs so far throughout his career? And if so, how can he be better in the playoffs? I'm just curious what you thought of his play, in Washington, the Boston series, what count the Columbus qualifying round series as well. What do you think of Mitch Martyr's play throughout those games? Because I'll just give you some numbers here. In 27 games, he's gotten only 5 goals, 18 assists, and he's got 23 points. And that assist on the Matthews goal, by the way, was his first 5v5 point in the playoffs since game 1 versus Boston. So that was on April 11th of 2019. I'm just curious, what do you think of his play in the playoffs?
Overall, I think it all goes back to what I said when I was grading him. I think especially throughout game 1 and maybe a little bit into game 2 before he started lighting it up like the rest of the team, he doesn't look confident. He looks like he overthinks every play, and he looks like he holds onto the puck way too long every time he's got an opportunity to do something, which is a lot of what we saw from Mitch Martyr in the 2019-20 season. And I noticed that he kind of shed that narrative about him throughout the regular season this year. He started to look a little more like himself. But in terms of the playoffs specifically, I think he's just got to trust himself a little more. He's got to take shots. I obviously, we know he's not the best shooter on the team, but if you have an open lane to shoot the puck, you have to take that opportunity. So I think as long as he he plays confidently and he plays knowing like, okay, I'm Mitch Martyr, right? Like I know I'm capable offensively. I'm capable of being the best producer. I think we're going to see a much better version of Marner throughout these playoffs. But in terms of the past, I think it all, like I said, just comes back to the lack of confidence on his end.
Yeah, totally. And it's hard to really say everybody on that team. I mean, Austin Matthews has even had his blemishes in the playoffs, especially during Boston, but he's been able to persevere. And I do think Mitch Marner eventually will hit that top gear that we've seen of him throughout glamours in the regular season this past year. I think he can really be on a Nathan McKinnon like level if he can really reach his potential. Same with Austin Matthews, the guy who everybody has really liked so far, which is nice. I think even the Boomers don't mind his play so far even as well. That's William Nylander, leading the team in goals through 2 games, has really stepped up in this series. He even assisted on Kerfoot's empty netter to seal the deal in game 2. And he's even laying the body, Alex, what have you thought of his plays so far?
Truthfully, Jordan, throughout these first 2 games, William Nylander is the only player I'm going to give an A+ to, because I don't know what more you can ask of him. Like you said, he's been their top producer, and he scored obviously their only goal in game 1. He scored a crucial goal for them yesterday. And like you said, he's throwing the body. He's turning into an all tools kind of guy. And I think a lot of people, when they judge William Nylander, they look to him and they call him lazy, or they call him like they say he has no heart or anything like that. And I think the reason people think that, and I don't think you'll understand this unless you watch the games regularly and if you really look for it, but I think a lot of the reason he gets that lazy notion is just because he's not a put your head down and gun for it type of skater like Mitch Marner or Zach Hyman. He's a very graceful skater, and he gets a lot of his stride out of his glides, which kind of in turn, I guess if you're watching from a different perspective, may make him look lazy, but he is not a lazy player by any means. And even in game 1, he decked Brett Kulak. He picked up the puck and he scored. So, like, how many times have we seen that from Nylander before? A hit leading up to a goal. Like you said, he's starting to impress the Boomers, I'd like to think, a little bit, and just everyone in general. So I think he's been far and away their best player throughout this series. And even though it's only 2 games, I'd have to give him an A+ so far.
I really like that note about his skating stride, because I think that has a lot to do with it. His skating stride kind of makes it look like it's so effortless the way he's skating. It looks like he's not even really putting that much effort into it. And that's something Jack Eichel, who I covered the Buffalo Sabres with the Hockey Writers as well, also kind of has that notion about him. These players make it look so effortless that, some of the older people might as well say boomers of the world kind of don't think they're trying as hard, but as we see, they've been pretty great. I mean, William Nylander, obviously what's happened to John Tavares has completely affected his lineup situation. So his expected goals for numbers don't look fantastic, although it got better in game 2. He had a 49% expected goals for percentage in game 1, bumped it up to 55% in game 2, playing on the line with Nick Foligno and Alex Galchenyuk. My grade for him is an A. I'm going to tie him with Austin Matthews. I see why you could give him an A+, though, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. His defensive play, I will say, wasn't necessarily perfect on that first Jesperi Kotkaniemi goal. I don't know if it was as bad as Kevin Bieksa was trying to make it seem on the broadcast, but I do think he could have maybe been a little bit tighter in this defensive position there, but I think he's just generally been fantastic, and it's not too much more that you can ask for out of the player. Now, let's get into kind of the second group of people, and a lot of people don't really know about this guy, and he didn't play in game 2. But I'm going to kick it off with Riley Nash, and obviously what a first game to have to play with this new team, Like, he was traded, and he hasn't played a single game since that trade that sent him to Toronto because of LTIR reasons. They couldn't afford to put him in the lineup. And we know with this player that he's really able to shut down the opposition, specifically when it comes to his wins above replacement. His even strength defensive component in that category, according to JFresh Hockey, is in the 99th percentile. This guy is among the best in the entire NHL at shutting down the opposition. The problem is he cannot generate offense at all the other ways. So if you're putting him in a 4th line position, I think he could be really great, but we have the old man line doing that right now. And I think they've been playing great themselves. So if Riley Nash can't really play in that 3rd line and produce that well, which I don't think necessarily they need him at the moment, I don't think he necessarily needs to be playing. So, I mean, he played 10-21 in game 1, had 0 shots on goal. Expected goals for was only at a 4%, the worst on the team. Again, I'm not going to try to crucify this player, but I'm just curious what you thought of Riley Nash in game 1, if you have too much of an opinion on him.
Yeah, I do have quite the opinion on him. I think he came in and did his job on on game 1. And I don't think anyone was expecting him to come in and be an offensive player and come in and score goals like Alex Kerfoot or like any of your other third liners would. Having said that, the Leafs penalty kill was perfect in game 1 against Montreal, and I think Riley Nash was a big reason for that. Having said that, I do understand why he sat in game 2, because Riley Nash is the type of guy that you use if you're playing the Edmonton Oilers in a series and you need to shut down Connor McDavid. And the Habs have some guys who are capable of scoring, don't get me wrong, but they don't have a Connor McDavid or an Austin Matthews or a Nathan McKinnon to worry about. They've got a lot of good offensive players. They don't have any real stars that you have to worry about. And I think especially with the JT injury in game 1, when the Leafs brought Engvall and Alex Galchenyuk into the lineup in favor of Riley Nash, I think a big reason for that was simply just to replace JT's offense. And I think you have a much better chance of doing that if you have Engvall and Galchenyuk in the lineup versus Riley Nash. Having said that, if the Leafs do advance past the first round and they do end up playing a Winnipeg or an Edmonton in the second round, I think you're going to see a lot more of Riley Nash. But against Montreal, I think you got to just fight them with your offense instead of trying to shut them down, because they don't really have, like I said, that Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl that the Oilers would have.
Well, you kind of teased it right there, so I'm going to pose this question. Do you think he will be the third line center in games 5, 6, or 7 if this series extends that far? And do you put guys like Alex Galchenyuk, Pierre Engvall, maybe even Adam Brooks in the lineup over Riley Nash at the moment?
Not at the moment. I would say that if we get to a point when we're in game 5 or game 6 or game 7 and the stakes are a little bit higher and you need to really worry about shutting Montreal's guys down, then I think you'll use Riley Nash. But I think as long as this current lineup is winning the way it is, I think we're going to keep seeing Engvall and Galchenyuk. Engvall in particular, I mean, that third line last night, I'm sure we'll talk about this a little later, but the third line against Montreal in game 2, I think was incredible. I think the Montreal's expected goals or something was like at 0.0 after, like, when they're facing the third line. I'm sure we'll touch on that later on. So Engvall really impressed me. Galchenyuk didn't impress me quite as much, but you know why he's there, and you know that he's itching to do some damage against his former team. So I think as of now, this lineup's probably better off with Engvall and Galchenyuk versus Riley Nash.
Yeah, totally. Let's just kind of jump right into it. Now that we're on the topic, we're going to lump some of these next players together. I'm not going to give a grade to Riley Nash. I almost gave him a D, but then I kind of realized that's probably a little bit too harsh, obviously, given the circumstances. So I'm just not going to give him a grade. I think he can probably do better. But like I said, let's talk about this chem line, which obviously stands for Kerfoot, Engvall, Mikheyev. In terms of the regular season, these guys played really well, and they just proved it here in the playoffs. And at this moment, I think Pierre Engvall has won the job on that third line. People always kind of have people don't really like this guy, and I've seen it among people even I respect on Leafs Twitter. I can kind of get behind it at times too. It seems like he doesn't do a lot on the ice, but then when he's really on the top of his games, he's generating scoring chances. He's being effective in transition, which was a huge strength of his during the Toronto Marlies when he was developing as a prospect. I'm just curious, do you think the chem line is really the best third line that the Leafs can really put together in this playoffs, which really plays to the style of puck possession, and not letting the other team have the puck? That's kind of the type of defense they're going for, not necessarily a shutdown line, but is the chem line the line you go with if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs?
When it comes to the playoffs, I always stick with the notion that you got to go with whatever lineup's getting the job done with you. And as of now, that lineup with the chem line has been the one to get the job done. And obviously it's a small sample size. It's only one game, but I think as long as the chem line keeps showing up and producing, you got to keep icing them out there. Having said that, kind of going back to what we said about Riley Nash, I think if the Leafs were to get to a point, maybe say in a future playoff series against Edmonton or Winnipeg, like I said, and you have a guy like Connor McDavid that you need to shut down, or a guy like Leon Draisaitl that you got to shut down, I think at that point you might start to see Riley Nash in the lineup a little more often than not. But right now, the chem line has been their best third line far and away. I personally think Alex Kerfoot looked a little bit like a diet Brendan Gallagher yesterday, if you want to call him that. Like, offense not there, obviously, but in terms of shutting down the opposition and getting under their skin, I think Kerfoot did a great job of that yesterday. So I think as it stands, this line will be together as long as they keep winning games. But once it starts to falter and their roles kind of gets diminished a little bit, I think you'll probably see Riley Nash back in.
And as you alluded to earlier, these guys' expected goals for numbers in game two were just ridiculous. Alex Kerfoot at the worst one at a 96%. Engvall and Mikheyev were at a 99%. Just ridiculous how they were dominant at 5v5 there. Eh? I definitely think I agree with you in a lot of the stances that you have picked. This is the lineup you go with at the moment. And I think, considering you're missing your captain, if you can have a third line that can actually produce and, play very well at 5v5, that's a huge component, and that's going to really help them win any series in the playoffs, whether it's against Montreal, potentially probably Winnipeg at this point in the second round. I think the third line could be a decent X factor for them. And another guy that they've really been relying on and putting into higher up in the lineup throughout these past few games is Rasmus Sandin. He scored the first playoff goal of his career, has looked very comfortable on the first power play unit, and is dominating in shelter. Third pairing minutes at 5v5 of Jack Bogosian. His stats for the series at the moment are as follows. He has 1 goal in 2 games. Hits, funny enough, he somehow has 0 hits. I don't know. I was actually going to get into you with this. We've seen his reverse hip checks and certain types of plays, but even Sheldon Keefe kind of alluded to it. Do you think there's a notion that the Leafs aren't getting their hits recorded properly when they're playing at Scotiabank?
I think that's a really tough conversation to have, because you obviously, the team probably knows the best how many hits they've been able to tally. But, I never really like to look too much into comparing the amount of hits from each team per game, because I've always been a believer in the fact that if you tally less hits, you probably have the puck more often. So I don't really like looking at, being down in hits compared to Montreal as a bad thing.
Oh, yeah.
Having said that,
I agree.
I don't think losing in terms of hit count to the team you're playing is a bad thing at all. I really, and I'm not even necessarily sure that it's an indicator that you're a less physical team, because the Leafs were holding their own against Montreal. And I said this on Leafs Lounge with the Habs writer the episode with the Habs writers that we did. The Leafs do not need to match up with the Habs physically. All they have to do is hold their own and fight back a little bit. And so maybe I whether or not it's an indication of how many hits they actually threw in that game, I'm not sure. But to me, and if we're going off the eye test, I thought the Leafs really were able to hold their own physically against Montreal. And I think as long as they just keep pushing back when the Habs try and go after them a little bit, but don't get too crazy with it, I think they're fine.
Yeah, totally. And just to kind of bring that back to Rasmus Sandin, the advanced stats are quite interesting. In game 1, he only had a 45% expected goals for. That jumps up to over 90.8% in game 2. So quite a noticeable difference for that pairing. And we saw it on the power play. It's been interesting. There's some people that would argue Morgan Rielly would be a better fit there, but I actually do like what Sandin can do. I mean, his feeds to Austin Matthews were pretty nice, and he almost scored a few goals, so he could have even had more points in this series. And that shot of his can be lethal, whether it's a slap shot or the way he times it and finds that shooting lane. I think he honestly is a fit there, and they're quite clearly showcasing him to see if he could potentially even be doing this next season. Now, let's try to give a grade for Sandin here, because we've seen a few games of it. He's played some games at the end of the regular season there. We've seen 2 games now in this first round series. Obviously not the best play on that Paul Byron goal, but the fact that Byron even scored, that was ridiculous. I think Sandin couldn't have done too much more there besides, he's a little bit gassed. I'm giving him a B. He had a pretty great game too, and to handle those top minutes on the power play, his defensive reads are getting better each game. Whether it's embracing for hits or the subtle puck movements to avoid giving up possession, he's a fun player to watch. Would you agree, Alex?
Yeah, I'd give him a B too, honestly. Like, I think a lot of people, when you talk about Rasmus Sandin, you got to remember that this guy is 20 years old. He's younger than me, and I'm assuming probably younger than you as well.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
no. He's
talking
just older
about
than
a
me.
guy that's been. No,
he's not. He's a few months older.
Okay, well
than
there
me.
you go. Either way, he's around your age. Okay. So he is your age. He's about a year younger than me. So I think in this situation, you got to look at the fact that it's Rasmus Sandin, who's 20 years old, playing in the NHL playoffs. You literally cannot find a game of hockey or a series with higher stakes than Rasmus Sandin, or a level with higher stakes. And he's coming in there. And the fact that the only thing that we're dissecting negatively about him is, maybe he should have done something better on that Paul Byron goal. I think if that's the worst thing about Rasmus Sandin's game that we're talking about through these 2 games, I don't know how you give him any lower than a B. I think for his age and for his experience and his play style, I think he's fit in really well so far. And like you said, he's looked really good on the first power play unit too.
Yeah, and just a follow-up question to that. I want to know how you think Sandin has outperformed Travis Dermott, in your opinion, to earn that third pair left D spot. Because that Travis Dermott as your seventh defender at the moment is quite good. But I'm just curious how you think Sandin's outperformed him based off what you've seen so far.
I think Sandin's completely outperformed Travis Dermott. I love Travis Dermott. Well, I like Travis Dermott. I think he's a real capable bottom pairing defenseman, and I think he's just one of those guys where you won't hear his name too often, but it's probably a good thing. It just means he's doing his job quietly. Having said that, Rasmus Sandin has not really been any worse defensively, I would say, than Travis Dermott, and he's been better offensively than Dermott. So I think in the playoffs, and assuming you keep Bogosian in the lineup, just with his physicality and his veteran presence and his ability to clear out the front of the net, I think you have to keep Sandin on that bottom pairing until he starts to falter.
And, I think it's kind of starting to really come into fruition here. I really think Travis Dermott's going to be the guy that goes to Seattle, in my opinion. I don't know if in some sort of way, I don't know if it'll necessarily be through the expansion draft, but I think no matter what, I think a change of scenery would probably be best here for this player. It kind of reminds me somewhat similarly to Victor Mete, although that was more glorified situation. I don't think Travis Dermott is having those type of issues here. But I do think there is a chance he could be a top four defender on another team, in my opinion. So I could see him ending up somewhere else. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about Jack Campbell, everybody's favorite goalie. Who doesn't love this guy? He's been kind of quietly fantastic throughout these two games played. Throughout the season, nobody could get enough talking about Jack Campbell, but now it's the playoffs. You're not really hearing too much praise of this guy, and his stats in the series so far are 943 save percentage, and his goals saved above expected according to Money Puck is a 0.2, which puts him at 12 among goalies to play in these playoffs. Obviously, such a low sample size, but he's doing a lot compared to what, Carey Price, everybody was talking about playoff Price. He wasn't necessarily as great game 2 as in game 1, but we'll talk about it. What do you think of Jack Campbell's play so far? What would you grade him?
For Jack Campbell, I would probably give him an A-, just because the Leafs are in a position with their team and the layout of their roster where they don't need a goalie to come in and be their savior. They literally just need Jack Campbell to be average and keep pucks out in the net. And so far he's done that and then some. He only allowed 2 goals in game 1. One of them was a shorthanded breakaway, and he only allowed 1 goal yesterday. So I don't really see a need to give him anything lower than an A-. I think he's shown up, he's done his job, and the Leafs have handled the rest. And unless he really, really starts to falter and he starts to get to a point where it's like, okay, having this guy in the lineup is kind of deteriorating our chances of advancing, I think you got to keep him in the lineup. You got to keep starting him until he really starts to falter, and maybe give Fred one side of that back-to-back against Montreal coming up this week. But aside from that, I don't think you could have asked for much more out of Campbell, and I think I'd probably give him an A-.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Honestly, I'm kind of in the boat. I actually did give him an A because I do think in general he's giving the team a chance to win. He's only allowed 3 goals, for God's sakes, in 2 games. I know Montreal isn't the best offensive team, and they're actively choosing some guys that they probably shouldn't be to play over the likes of Cole Caulfield due to experience. But we can get into that a tiny bit later. I just think Jack Campbell's doing a lot here, and obviously I hope he continues to do that throughout the rest of the series, because I think if Freddie Anderson was in that now, we would be having a completely different conversation, or maybe not, because Carey Price looked pretty bad with Laval too, and now he's looked pretty decent so far. So goalies are voodoo, as we all know. But with that, let's head into our general Leafs questions, and we're going to be doing a couple over-unders here, Alex. And we're going to start with Alex
Okay.
Galchenyuk. Let's do it. So I'm putting the number at 3. How many games is Alex Galchenyuk going to play in the Leafs Habs series for the team? I'm putting the over 3, under 3. What do you think?
So
he's played one so far.
Yeah. So over 3 games total, not like from this point forward.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, from this point forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So from this point forward, I think that's a potential of 5 games left. I'll give him the over on this. Or actually, No, I will give him the under on this one.
Okay.
I'm gonna give Alex Galchenyuk the under. It took me a second there, but the way I see it, I don't think there's ever going to be another point in this series when the Leafs have to take both Engvall and Galchenyuk out of the lineup. I think if at any point Riley Nash comes back into the lineup, or maybe they want to give Adam Brooks a look or something like that, I don't see how you break up the chem line in favor of Alex Galchenyuk unless he comes out in game 3 and scores a big goal or does something to make his mark. He didn't look bad last night or game 2 against Montreal, but I wouldn't say he really did anything to sort of, I guess, kind of set his lineup spot in stone. So if we're going over under on 3, I'd probably say under, but again, that all depends on how he performs over these next 2 games.
Yeah, totally. And for this next one, I'm going to have to get you to put your Montreal Canadiens hat on. We got to kind of see it from their perspective. I'm putting the over under at 2. How many games does Cole Caulfield play for Montreal in this series? Is it going to be over 2 games, under 2 games? We're 2 games played so far. The Leafs could potentially take this series in 3 games, maybe even Montreal. There's 3 to 5 games left. Does Cole Caulfield play in over 2 of them or under 2 of them?
That's another really tough one, but I would probably say over for Cole Caulfield. And the only reason I say over is because I think I just have this feeling, and I'm on Leafs Twitter, and I'm pretty active on Leafs Twitter, as I'm sure you're aware of, and anyone else listening to this. And I've seen a lot of Leaf fans bullying Cole Caulfield. And I always, I respect the banter. I respect that he's sort of like our version of their version of Nick Robertson. So I understand it. Yeah, you like to make fun of your rivals' players, but I keep telling Leafs Twitter, stop making fun of Caulfield because he is going to light this team up for so many years to come. And I have this sneaking suspicion that when Ducharme decides to finally bring him into the playoffs, he's going to score a big goal. And even if it's not a big goal, he's going to make his mark known. And if that happens, I don't see any way you take him out of the lineup. So going with my gut here, I think it's going to be, I think if Cole Caulfield does get into the lineup, I think he's going to be there to stay.
Yeah, those Twitter accounts that make fun of Cole Caulfield, I honestly, I do respect them. I always laugh when I see those tweets, and it's hilarious.
Me too. I laugh at the jokes too.
The Habs fans, some people take that really seriously. Like, they actually take it as such a slight against their team. I've even seen some huge accounts that tweet about that. But yeah, it's just funny banter. We all know that he's going to score a hat trick against the Leafs, potentially even in this series. Who knows?
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't.
He scored his first, and he scored his first. Did he not score his first NHL goal, or maybe not his first NHL goal, but did he not score in overtime against the Leafs?
Yeah, he did. His second career goal was an overtime winner, I believe. It was 2 nights after his first
second
overtime
career goal.
It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
we'll get used to him pretty soon.
We know what's going to happen.
And I have the last question here out of our general Leafs questions. I know you're going to like this one, and it's about the Wayne train, Wayne Simmons. And I want to know if you think he's going to be an X factor for the Leafs. We saw him be a pest in the final minutes of game 2, getting under the skin of Joel Edmondson and Ben Sherrod. I know you're a huge fan, as all of us. So give me a take. Is he an X factor in this series?
Yes, I do think he's an X factor, because we know that Montreal is a physical team, and we know that's how they're going to play the Leafs. They're going to play them physically. It worked for Columbus in the bubble last year. The Montreal Canadiens are going to be trying to do the exact same thing, but the Leafs did not have a Wayne Simmons last year. And I'm not saying that the lack of a physical guy like Simmons is the reason they lost, because they obviously had Kyle Clifford in the bubble last year. He didn't make much of an impact. But if you've got Wayne Simmons in the lineup, he is going to be the first guy to answer the bell every single time there is any sort of physical conflict between the Habs and the Leafs. And whether it's sticking up for one of his own players or answering the bell for one of Montreal's players, we've seen him on both ends of it this year. He went after Alex Edler after Edler injured Hyman, and then he fought, I believe it was Jordy Ben after I can't remember who it was that got injured, but he was answering the bell for something similar to that. So Wayne Simmons has been on both ends of this. And if anything physical or controversial happens in this series from this point forward, whether it's the Leafs laying a questionable hit on one of Montreal's guys or Montreal laying a questionable hit on one of the Leafs guys, Wayne Simmons is going to be the one to answer the bell. And I think he's going to be an X factor, because he's going to be the first guy in the middle of the scrums whenever any sort of adversity raises physically. So yes, I do think he's an X factor, to answer your question.
I kind of like that you mentioned Kyle Clifford last year because I don't even think he ever got in one fight as a member of the Leafs. He wasn't necessarily what
No,
he
he
was
didn't.
touted as to be. And I think Wayne Simmons has probably outperformed what he was expected to be. And obviously there's so much debate about this guy, the discourse that surrounds him. I understand it. In terms of his actual play, he probably shouldn't really be above the fourth line, but guess what? He's on the fourth line now. I know there was so much panic when he was on the Matthews line for that opening shift. I think that was just to send a message, honestly, from Sheldon Keefe. It looked like, because he was on the fourth line, the grumpy old man line,
Yes.
by the second shift of the game. So, and I think what he does after those whistles, he'll stick up for any guy in that room. Everybody loves Wayne Simmons, and it's like that with Joe Thornton. It's like that with Jason Spezza. That's why when you have guys like this on your team and in these type of leadership roles, it just goes a long way. And the Leafs really haven't had these types of guys in their previous playoff runs, and I do think there's going to be a noticeable difference here, especially with the absence of John Tavares at the moment. And it's just amazing. And a guy that was like this, though, we're going to head into our general NHL news now, because we got to talk about a little bit about the other teams. Nazim Kadri, everybody loved Nazim Kadri as a Leaf until they didn't. We all saw what happened in 2018 and 2019 in those Boston series. He got those suspensions, and guess what? He's done it again. He got 3 strikes, and he's been suspended for 8 games by NHL player safety for his hit on Justin Falk. Do you think that's fair for him? I'm curious to get your take on this.
Yes, I do think it's fair for him, and I'm not sure. Obviously, it was a dangerous hit, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look back at Kadri's history in the playoffs. He was suspended in 2018. He was suspended in 2019. Now he's suspended again this year. And Kadri, as much as I love him and as much as Leafs Nation loves him, and I know a lot of Leaf fans have a bit of a sour taste in their mouth on the way the whole Barry Kerfoot trade ended up working out for the Leafs. But the reality is, Kadri is what he is, and the Leafs just simply could not stand to lose him again in the playoffs this year. He's shown that he can't really get his emotions in check in crunch time, and he's shown that he's a physical guy, and obviously it's great to have a guy who will stand up for his teammates, but when you're kind of screwing over your own team in the process, that's when it gets to be a little bit of an issue, and I think the Leafs just didn't want to deal with that anymore, on top of obviously not wanting to waste $4.5 million on a potential 30-goal scorer on the third line behind Tavares and Matthews. But, the way I see it, it's just the Leafs couldn't deal with Kadri in the playoffs anymore. And I think we're starting to see now that this is a bit of an issue for him. He can't keep his emotions together in the playoffs. And now it's at a point where it's screwing over the Avalanche. So I do think it was a fair suspension for Kadri. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly if the effect of the hit really lines up with the 8 games. It was a dangerous hit, but I definitely think that his history in the playoffs played into that.
Yeah, and I really like some of the takeaways you concluded there. You had to differentiate the fact that Nazim Kadri kind of had to be traded by the Leafs, at that point after taking that second suspension. But you have to differentiate that perspective on it from the fact that the Leafs, they didn't get enough value for him in return, even though at the time of the trade, everybody believed it was a steal for the Leafs. I remember that. I guess Ian Tulloch technically was the only guy that probably didn't think that. But when I saw that trade, I was like, wow, we got Tyson Barrie and Alex Kerfoot. And remember, Alex Kerfoot had like a 43-point season after that year. I thought the Leafs were basically getting almost a very similar player in Kadri as Kerfoot. And although Kerfoot probably hasn't been as good as Kadri's been, obviously, and he probably is overpaid for what his production was this season. I do think, we're starting to see it in the playoffs. He's been a useful player. And imagine if it was TJ Brody in that trade instead of Tyson Barrie. Imagine if you could have swapped those 2 players out. The perception would be completely different. And it basically was because the Leafs got TJ Brody the following offseason for free in free agency. Yeah. So if you want, you can look at it that way if you want to make yourself happy. I think overall, I really hope Kadri can I hope he can figure this out, man, because eventually NHL teams will not want this player if he continues doing this. And I do think this is one of the only fair suspensions NHL player safety has done, and it's interesting that they suspended Kadri for this long, considering they didn't give Tom Wilson any games. I will say that's the only notes I'll make of that. Let's head into our next point here. I just want to know, let's have some fun. What has been your favorite series to watch so far? Obviously, Tampa, Florida has been a blast. I've actually really enjoyed the Penguins Islanders series just because of how tight the games have been, and surprisingly, there have been some offensive games. The contrast between the different systems used by the teams has led to games where either the Islanders can play the trap and limit every Pens chance, or Jeff Carter gets a 2-goal game and they can dominate at 5v5 and on the power play. Which series are you watching the most there, Alex, besides the Leafs Habs?
So before Leafs and Habs started, I'd say the series I watched the most was definitely Boston, Washington.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, it's just because you've got two of the heaviest teams in the NHL going at it. And I'm not really much of a, rock'em sock'em old time hockey fan. Like I think there's definitely more room for analytics and skill in today's NHL, but I'd be lying if I said that watching physical hockey didn't fire me up. And, just getting to watch Tom Wilson go at it with Boston's heaviest players and watching those two teams go at it, it's been incredible. And they've been great games so far. And I will also add that it's probably, the reason I'm saying this is probably because when I watch those games, we get the Washington broadcast, so I don't have to listen to Jack Edwards.
Oh, yeah.
So that probably helps.
Play a factor there.
But overall, yeah. Yeah. Overall, though, yeah, Washington-Boston's been my most exciting series so far. I'd imagine Tampa, Florida has had a couple good games as well, but I only got to catch the third period of the one crazy game when Tampa tied it up took the lead with like 5 minutes left. So I didn't really get to watch too much of that series so far anyways, but Boston-Washington's been one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, another one that's actually been kind of interesting, which is kind of surprising, is Nashville, Carolina. That game is currently in overtime. We have not done the final score. Nashville could potentially tie up the series, That's actually been interesting because Carolina, has dominated the play at times at 5v5, but Nashville has figured out a way to come back in that series, and they've made it interesting, So I'm curious to see if they could force a really great team like Carolina to 6 or 7 games. And with that, let's get into our last question. We got to add the Leaf element into it. So I want to know, which former Leafs are you cheering for in this postseason? Just name any that you can think of. For me, I'll start, I really liked Kasperi Kapanen, especially when he scored that first goal for Pittsburgh. There's a lot of members of this Leafs fan base that I think really did not like this guy at the end. And he obviously frustrated even me at times, whether it was his play or maybe some of his off-ice actions. But to see him finally kind of get into a position, he's on a line with Jeff Carter. Who could have ever predicted that last season, that both those two would be playing on the same line for the Pittsburgh Penguins? I want to know who you're cheering for in regards to former Leafs.
Not to completely steal your point here, but I probably would say Kasperi Kapanen as well. I would have, truth be told, I would have said Nazim Kadri, but he's suspended now, as we just covered. So, yeah, Kadri's not really going to have much of an opportunity to do much for his team over the next couple games. So I would say Kasperi Kapanen. I've always liked Kapanen as a player, and I tweeted something about this the other day about how I think he's worth dressing in your lineup alone just for his clutch factor. I mean, you go down the list of big goals that he's scored in big games. He got the overtime winner for Finland in the gold medal World Junior game in 2016. He scored the tying goal in the game where the Leafs clinched in 2016-17 against Pittsburgh. He scored the game 2 overtime winner against Washington. He scored the tying goal against Boston in 2018 before, obviously, we know how that turned out. This guy sleeps to big goals. And I love watching him play in crunch time and during games when the stakes are as high as they are, because Kasperi Kapanen just has a way to show up and get it done when it really matters. So I'd like to see him do well this year.
Hey, even former Leaf Ben Harper has found an NHL job in Nashville, playing with Eric Goodbranson. What an interesting pairing they've gone with for their third pair. A guy who never even touched the Leafs ice.
That might be the slowest pairing in NHL history.
Oh, yeah, totally. So I don't know. I mean, but in contrast to that, Cody Cece's basically been a great defender for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So it's interesting to see how those two storylines have kind of gone since those two left Ottawa. So with that, I think we're ready to end the show here, guys. So I just want to say thank you for listening to the inaugural episode of the Babbling Buds podcast. This first episode was great, as Alex gave a lot of great insight, and he's only the first guest that I have lined up for the show. As well, during the playoffs, I have decided that there's just too much hockey to talk about. So I'm announcing that there will also be episodes uploaded on Thursdays on top of Sunday during this Toronto Maple Leafs playoff run, just so we can catch some other opinions just like Alex and have a nice conversation. And once again, thanks for listening or watching. and we have babbled enough for this time. So stay safe, everybody. Thank you, Alex, for joining me.